Hello and welcome to the CNBC-TV18 special. I'm Shireen Bhan. India's growing internet economy roars towards $1 trillion by 2030. That's the roaring headline that's coming in from the Google Temasek Bain report. But there is a lot of other data and a lot of other nuance that we need to consider looking at as well. Sample this just for context. If you take a look at India versus other large digital economies, what's the trend that the report highlights? The rise in online usage has put India ahead of the world's largest digital economies. Indians spend an average 6.5 hours online a day. That's higher than China, but it's still lower than the US. The highest daily social media usage is in India of 2.8 hours versus the global average of 2.5 hours. At least 1.6 hours are spent daily watching online videos, and that number is 1.3 hours in the US. With average 65 yearly digital payments per person, India is ahead of both China and the US. Well, to talk about the highlights of the report, and more importantly, what India's internet economy could look like by 2030, I have with me a special guest today. Sanjay, thanks very much for joining us. Vishesh and Parijat, appreciate your time as well here on this conversation. I'm going to ask the three of you the first opening question, and Sanjay, I'll start by asking you. I just gave a very quick snapshot of some of the numbers that the report highlights. What, to your mind, is the big number and the big takeaway attached to that number?
Yeah, first, thank you for having us here. I think the big thing in my mind is the fundamental foundational shift that we're seeing at this moment today on three aspects. One is on consumer. We think about India as rural and urban consumers as being very different. But if you look at this report, it shows that the consumers in tier 3, tier 4 towns is as adaptable, as keen to really get on to digital. One. Second, we think of digital economy through startups. But you find in India, both large and small traditional businesses are really investing deeply and powering the digital economy forward. And third, the leap from UPI to ONDC. So I think all these three fundamental shifts, in my mind, is what stands out. So therefore, we feel very confident, and I feel personally very confident, that we are ready for the big leap as India in getting to a $1 trillion digital economy. You know, speaking of that big leap, Vishesh, and I'll put that question to you because, you know, as the report says, we are currently in the midst of a digital decade. And the question now is, 2030, do we get to that $1 trillion? And the report believes that we will get to that $1 trillion in terms of the internet economy. The big takeaway for you and the biggest number that you're going to focus on?
So thank you, Shireen, for having me on the show. I think, you know, there are a lot of important numbers in the report, right? Obviously, you have the 1 trillion, you have all the statistics that you just spoke about. To me, the fundamental underpinning is actually a very different number, right? For me, the most important number in the report is the per capita GDP of
going from 2,500 to 5,000.
Exactly, $5,500, because that is the underpinning of not just the internet economy in India, but of Indian growth as a whole, right, across sectors. And I'm personally quite confident that we will get there. Our trajectory is very good. But, you know, if you were to point a gun at my head and say, what's the biggest risk to the numbers in this report being achieved, I would say it is that $5,500 of per capita GDP. Because it's not just the absolute number, the complexion of what people do, how they consume once they hit, you know, $2,500 per capita GDP changes very materially. From a very essentials-driven consumption spend, it moves a lot into discretionary spends. And that is actually what creates, you know, large businesses. That is what creates disproportionate value across the value chain. So to me, you know, that's the biggest number to focus on, and I'm quite confident that we get there.
It is, yes, you're right in pointing that out. It is, in fact, the biggest opportunity, but also perhaps the biggest risk at this point in time as we speak. But, you know, you've preempted the point that I was trying to raise with you, and Parijat, let's address that issue with you. You know, to the point that was made just now by Vishesh about getting from 2,500 to 5,500 by 2030, and that's really going to be the answer perhaps to bridging this gap between the addressable market and the monetizable market. Because here's also what the data tells us, that just 1% of Indians account for 45% of all flight passengers. The top 5% of Zomato's users are responsible for 33% of all orders placed on the app. Even UPI, 6.5% of UPI users are responsible for 44% of the transactions. So a lot of what this report talks about is predicated on that 2.5 becoming 5,500, correct?
So there is absolutely concentration of consumption of spend that exists today. I think behind the 2.5 to the 5,500 change is also a transition in household income that has already been underway. So, if you go back to 2015, 2018, 1 in 6 households, 1 in 7 households was upper or middle income. By 2030, we actually see that, 1 in 2 households will be middle or upper income. So yes, there will be a dispersion around that 5,500 number, but there will be many more, 200 million households, which will actually be in that category, which can, to Vishesh's point earlier, which can have a bigger consumption basket, which can afford to pay a premium, and which will actually, just engage in purchasing newer categories more frequently than they've done so far.
Yeah, and that is the bet that everybody at this point in time is making. So Sanjay, let's address this in the context of what each one of you is going to be doing in this market. And let's talk about it starting from a Google perspective. In 2020, Sundar had laid out in the context of the Google Digitization Fund 4 priorities for the Indian market. Language, of course, was one of them. And I want to understand from you, in context of those priorities and linking them to what this report is highlighting in terms of opportunities, what does the road ahead look like?
So I think, as you said, Sundar had talked about a vision for the future. And one of the big things he said at that time is that when you solve for India, you solve for the world. And really making India the innovation hub for Google. And fundamentally there, the big opportunity lies in enabling these billion Indians to interact and leverage the power of internet. So I think moving internet, and that's the effort that Google has been on for the last 5 to 7 years, to move from an English language internet to an Indian language internet. To me, that's the biggest focus area for Google in India, to enable these Indians to leverage the power of internet.
Yeah, moving to an Indian language internet is going to, of course, be crucial as well. And I want to now address that, linking it to the kinds of investments that we can expect Google to make through the digitization fund as well as your equity growth fund. What kind of opportunities do you believe that you wish to bet on in light of what the report is telling you?
So I think, one, this report says that India is going to be a story across both so-called urban, but really the Bharat, which is really going to unleash. So one investment, as I said, is around language. But I think the more important thing is that this is going to provide an opportunity for us to both serve consumers and customers at scale by using the power of technology. At Google, we believe we are the catalyst for digital transformation. So really our investment in going in enabling fundamental technology, be it leveraging Android to make the smartphone affordable, be it into technology to enable companies, whether startups or traditional companies, to leverage the power of India or Google technology. And to those effects, the big changes we are making is investing in people capability in India. So we have grown our people capability in India for close to around 5-6x in the last 3 years. And we believe it's going to continue to invest significantly more by ensuring that we make India the innovation hub for Google.
Okay, innovation hub for Google. Parijat, I just want to pick up on this Bharat aspect, because again, this is one of those things that everybody talks about, the Bharat opportunity. What is the report telling you? Each one of you said that, look, the consumer in tier 2, tier 3 cities is now equally adaptable. Their paying capacity may be different, but they also want to move towards digital platforms. They also want to enjoy the convenience that these digital platforms allow for. But, as we look at Bharat, and it cannot be a sort of one-size-fits-all solution or a homogeneous sort of conglomerate. What are the things that we need to be mindful of?
Great. No, that's a great question. And absolutely, it is not one homogeneous market. So I think there are a few aspects that companies will need to be very thoughtful about. The first, I think, is just in terms of understanding the geographical preferences, the geographical, whether it's language, whether it's voice, whether it's, preference for brands of a particular kind, etc. So one is just understanding that at a very, granular level. The second is in terms of just rewiring their own organizations to be able to tap into this opportunity, not only to unlock the revenue, as you're saying, but to unlock this revenue in a more sustainable manner. And for that, it means going back to using more technologies, using newer technologies. NLP is one, Gen AI would be another one, where you really try and drive more productivity, more efficiency into existing operations. So I think that's going to be the second one. And the third third, frankly, is going to be in terms of just how do they reconfigure their organizations to do this. So one is using the tools and technology.
Yeah.
The third is really just how do they change their organizations to go after this.
Right. Vishesh, and I want to address this with you in the context of what's happening with the Indian startup ecosystem, because clearly when we talk about the Indian internet economy, this is going to be one of the pillars, one of the growth drivers. Currently, in this environment where, it's hard to access funding for a lot of the startups in this universe, there is, I would imagine, what you would call creative destruction that's taking place. How much do you believe that this is going to impact the growth of the ecosystem in the near term, in the short term, and what are the opportunities that you foresee?
So I'll answer at two levels, right? One is at a slightly philosophical level, so please bear with me. But if you zoom out and if you look
when
at...
the times get tough, investors get philosophical, is it?
You're forced to. But, jokes apart, I think if you zoom out and you see, you study the nature of any progress across industries, right? It may look like it's a straight line, but actually there's a lot of ebbs and flows, right? It seldom moves like this. It always moves like this, right? And I would argue that, one causes the other. So a frenzy in optimism causes, excess funding, excess valuations, which then causes companies to, try things that, haven't been tried before because they need to grow into those valuations, which then leads to failure, which then leads to, cutting back, and which leads to investor sentiment going down. So it's all kind of part of a natural cycle. I think we are, again, I'm optimistic. I think we are at the fag end of one such cycle.
Okay.
We've seen, the biggest frenzy in our times. Again, just to zoom out, when COVID happened, everyone was caught like a deer in headlamps, right? We didn't know what was going to happen, whether our way of life would change forever. And then within 3 to 4 months, there was, a very clear impetus to certain businesses, right? The entire digital ecosystem benefited a lot. And that was partly reflexive, partly, I would say, very primitive reaction that, this is going to change the world and, let's jump in. Right? That played out for a bit. The cycle that I was talking about played out for a bit. And then, COVID went away. We came back to a normal way of life. And, some of the excesses got washed out. And I think we are in that phase where, those excesses are washed out. I think we have taken the positives. The way we all work is, hopefully going to be different at all points in the future from what it was in the past. The way we consume, the way we engage, all of that is going to be different. Right, so again, I think this was, the lens that I wanted to take, that, we are in tough times, but I think, this creative destruction always helps in creating more sustainable companies, in creating more eternal companies, if you will. Right, now coming to the second level, which is, very tactical, across our portfolio, across the ecosystem, we are seeing a lot of M&A opportunities. So, the strong players are acquiring the weak. There are mergers happening because, there are efficiencies. You can acquire customers, better if you are together versus fighting each other. And again, that is part of the cycle, right? It's part of the creative destruction process. We are seeing that happen, and we are, in fact, actively encouraging it because that leads to better outcomes for the ecosystem as a whole.